Hi, this is Jeff Cutter on the Cinematography podcast.
This is Cinepod, the Cinematography podcast, a program about the art, craft, and philosophy of the moving image presented by Hot Rod Cameras. I'm your host, Ilya Friedman, and today on the show, my co-host Ben Rock and I interview DP Jeff Cutter. His movies include 10 Cloverfield Lane, as well as the Hulu Predator movie, Prey. His latest film, in theaters now, is Predator, Badlands.
So then going into Badlands, it was definitely, I wanted to kind of continue that naturalistic sort of feeling and that very grounded approach. Dan is very much always about, well, how do we make this, what can we add to this, thinking about ways, whether it's smoke and fog, or whether it's rain, or whether it's, sand and dust blowing up, always what are the textural ways that we can affect the image, which then also affects the light? How do we give it mood?
In this episode, you'll learn all about the creative partnership between Jeff Cutter and Dan Trachtenberg since 10 Cloverfield Lane. You'll also learn about Jeff and Dan's unique oner thought exercise as a creative way to find clear focus on subtext, context, and the character of each scene. You'll also hear about keeping Prey's grounded, naturalistic lighting and visual style while expanding it for Predator Badlands. And finally, the distinct color palettes used for the film's different environments, from the harsh brown-blue of the Yautja planet, the green naturalism of Genna, and the industrial cyan-green-blue of the Weyland-Yutani base. After the interview, stick around for Short Ends, our pet obsessions of the week, but first, find out what's going on in the world of entertainment in Close Focus. So Ben, Close Focus, what do we got to yak about today?
Well, it feels like we have to address kind of an elephant in the room in the business, which is that we've had kind of a record bad October, which is usually not a bad month for movies. And it's the worst, according to the Hollywood Reporter, the worst October in 27 years.
Wow, that's not great.
Yeah. So worst October in 27 years. I have one point that I want to make that I've sort of been spewing about this whole time, which is the movies that are coming out now are the movies that would have been greenlit during the writers' strike and the actors' strike. And that period of time basically hamstrung what was in theaters right now. So, obviously stuff is coming out, but less stuff is coming out because the studios and everyone are kind of pacing themselves and putting out less stuff. I also there's one culprit that I want to throw under the bus about a lot of this, which is marketing. I know, like, we deal with a lot of PR people over here who aren't the people who market the actual films, but I feel like the films aren't, for whatever reason, the marketing isn't getting out. And it's not hitting. And sometimes the movies are underwhelming people, or, I'm not going to say anything negative about Tron Ares because I really enjoyed Tron Ares. And I think Jeff Cronenweth did a phenomenal job shooting it. And I thought it was a good time. But Tron is not, I think, the beloved franchise that Disney keeps hoping to turn it into, And so spending however much money they spend on these Tron movies, like they're reaching a diminished, like you and I are the right age to have been kids when the first one came out. And it wasn't a hit then. And, I do face this a lot, which is people of our demographic are less likely to go to the theaters. And so somebody who's going to go see Tron Ares is maybe someone who saw the last Tron movie when it came out, 12 years ago. And, there's a lack of momentum. But, I have to say, in the same breath, Predator Badlands doing pretty well. And, the Predator series has, started off with a bang with the first Predator. And then it went through several, I'm not saying bad movies, but several movies that didn't connect with audiences until this very director made Prey. And that was really like the first, home run Predator movie since the first one. And that one was released straight to streaming. And so here they are saying, like, I know you saw the last one on Hulu, but come to the movie theater and see it. And it worked. I don't know by what mechanism or what alchemy one could say, like, a Predator movie is going to have more of a draw than a Tron movie. I'm sure that there's focus grouping and stuff that's above my pay grade that goes into
I
this.
think that, if you just look at all the other IP that surrounds Predator and the natural crossovers that exist between Alien, I think that you would say that it's probably, even though it's slightly younger than Tron, it's probably it's a much more deeper property.
I mean, like a year or two younger than Tron. I mean, it's not.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean,
Predator was like 87 and Tron was what,
82, 83. So yeah, for 5 years, something like that. But I think Predator had made a lot more money at the box office over the years too. There was a lot of people who were used to it. So I don't think that the prophetic crystal ball gazers would guess too differently that Predator in theories. But I think people also thought the Predator franchise was basically dead before Prey. I don't think people were really thinking of it as having new life, but Prey really did. It brought it back in a real way. I think it's interesting though. I think you're correct. There was definitely a bit of a lag that happened with the entertainment industry and the writers and actors strikes and the project. So pacing yourself is exactly on target. And interesting though, I heard a statistic this past week too, that supposedly 2025 has been a boon for spec scripts. More spec scripts have been sold in 2025 at like in any point since like 2007 or 2008. So it's like, even though that, October may have been down and that people didn't go to, movie theaters, a bunch of people went and saw Predator. Predator had a really good October. So,
Yeah. And I think that, we've had a series of kind of downer movies. I mean, this is Oscar season. So, this is when you release your downer movies. So, we had things like Yorgos Lanthimos' Begonia, which isn't exactly a downer, but it's niche. Sure. It's odd. It doesn't have, I don't think, the mass appeal of something like Poor Things. I truly enjoyed Begonia. I thought it was excellent, but it's an art film. I mean, you could also argue that Poor Things is an art film, but I feel like Poor Things is an epic art film with a lot of the things you would see in a sweeping epic.
Yeah. Black Phone 2, I think, also made most of its money during October, though. I think that was a pretty big hit. It's made like 74 million now. So it's.
Yeah. No, I mean, there have been movies that have done okay. And then, of course, there was, what we talked about a couple weeks ago.
Chainsaw Man.
The anime, the weird influx of anime to the point now where when I go to the movies, I see trailers for anime series that I've never heard of, basically on every movie. So, brace yourselves, folks. We're about to see a lot of anime in theaters, and I'm here for it. It's maybe not something I know enough about to know what's good and what's bad in the anime world, but I'm like, whatever gets people into the theaters, I'm totally all for it, and it's definitely got a big audience. But the other thing that we have to say is that despite the fact that we're talking about record bad October, in this quarter we have a new Avatar movie coming out, which
will do well.
Don't ever bet against James Cameron. Yeah,
it will do really well.
And we have a new Wicked movie coming out. There's some stuff coming out that like can make this a successful quarter. But I remember right around Halloween kind of talking to some friends of mine and being like, why aren't there more horror movies out in theaters? We have, there's a new Five Nights at Freddy's. That seems like a perfect Halloween movie, but that's coming out. I think that's coming out before the end of this year. It's just been, I think, an odd year. Warner Brothers notoriously basically isn't releasing anything all fall. And Warner Brothers has had like one of the best years of any studio, with things like Weapons and Sinners and Minecraft, yada, yada, yada. So, the real question is, and a lot of people, in the industry are kind of chatting about this, is this the new normal or is this a fluke? And I call fluke. This is my call, but also like what we don't want to do is train people to have this behavior of like not wanting to go see stuff in the theater. I'm not saying we train an audience, but we do set up audience expectations. You and I don't, but the industry does. And I would love for audiences to expect to see cool stuff, but if next Halloween there's a kick-ass horror movie that if the next Weapons is coming out right around Halloween next year, there will be hopefully lines around the block to see it. That's what we want to see, right?
Yeah, it's interesting too, and it wouldn't surprise me if Warner Brothers scales back their releases too just because of the fact they seem to now be for sale. And that I think anytime a company is for sale, you get, I think a lot of people get risk averse. They don't want to do things that will screw it up. So if they're going to sell, we'll probably see some more oddities out of Warner Brothers for what they release and when.
Yeah, depending on, I mean, even if they do go up for sale, like the Skydance sale took over a year. It took a long time. I think it took over 2 years. And one of the things that they said this on The Town, Matt Bellamy's podcast, was that they thought that that part of the reason Warner isn't releasing movies this fall is because the marketing expenses would go on this year's expenses, but they don't actually record the profits until next year. So even if they had a massive hit in the fall, they don't see the profit until next year. So it makes them on paper look less exciting to a buyer.
Exactly right. And this is exactly what I'm talking about, that they're probably going to be making choices to make themselves look more attractive or look better for purchase. That is not necessarily in the is not exactly going to, it's going to be an outlier year then, because Warner Brothers is going to be throwing off just like Paramount was for the last couple of years. So
anyway, well, it's all a bummer, and I still think people should go check out Tron Ares. I thought it was awesome, and wait till you hear my short end, but it's about a movie that you can go see in theaters right now, and I think that that's probably enough about that. I hope that we have a better October next year, and I don't know. There was the I think it was Bill Totola who said to me, like, in 2024 everyone was saying stay alive till 25, and then he told me this year everyone's saying shit and bricks till 26. What rhymes with seven?
Thankfully, I haven't heard that limerick yet, but I think we should get to our interview with Jeff Cutter.
Here we go.
Joining me now is my co-host Ben Rock and cinematographer Jeff Cutter. He is the DP behind the new Predator Badlands movie. Welcome to the Cinematography Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
And also Prey, which I keep saying, if they put Prey in theaters, which they didn't when it came out, it would make, $80 million. It was such a beloved movie.
Prey was great.
Yeah,
it was.
Yeah, we were. Unfortunately, it was never planned. It was always intended to be streaming, but it was. We never treated it like a streaming movie, and we thought, let's just make a nice big widescreen epic, and yeah, it would have been great to see it in theaters, but.
All right,
at least this one
not too late.
Very excited.
It's not too late. They can still change their mind.
I was going to say there is I think AMC was doing a double feature, a brief re-release of Prey with Badlands.
Oh no, I didn't know about that, because I would totally go to that. I'm going to see if they're still doing that.
I want to kick things off by asking you. You certainly saw Predator when you were younger. This is probably something that you more or less like grew up seeing, maybe when you were a teenager or something like that. Or so tell me, what was it like getting the call to, hey, we're gonna make another Predator movie, and that you're gonna be the one to shoot it?
Yeah, I saw it when it first came out in 1987, and I was probably 18 or 19 years old, and it definitely. I had no idea what the movie was, and when going into it, and then it so sort of surprised me and was such a massive revelation, and I was a big sort of action adventure kind of fan. So yeah, I've always been a fan of the franchise, and after Dan and I did 10 Cloverfield Lane, he was working on it, but he didn't sort of when he was working on Prey, and he had this idea, but he had it quite a while before we actually shot it. But he wanted it to be a surprise, and so he was going to send me the script and have me read it without me knowing it was a Predator movie. But I think as he was like maybe delivering it to me, I think he slipped, and I said, "Wait, it's a Predator movie?" And he said, "Oh, damn, I wasn't going to tell you that," because he wanted me to read like the first 10 or 15 pages. So yes, it was quite exciting for me to sort of think, oh, wow, we're going to make a Predator movie. And to now be doing this, to have done another one, especially one that goes off in a completely different direction, is sort of, I won't say it's been a lifelong dream, but it definitely checks a bunch of boxes for me and thrills the kid inside me who saw this movie, so many years ago.
Just out of curiosity, did you ever see the Portal short that Dan made way back when? Because that was the first time Dan ever came on my radar. It was sort of like a viral movie short film that went around the interwebs, because at that time still Portal had a pretty big following, and there was a recent version. When did you guys connect? Did you connect just before 10 Cloverfield Lane, or how did you guys get connected?
Yeah, I had seen the Portal short, but yet I had not met him. We didn't know each other. And then the script came my way. I think he, when I talked to Dan about it now, he said he knew who I was based on some of the films I had done, and certainly music videos and commercials as well. And it was a very small movie and came my way, and I read the script and I really loved it. And the funny thing was, when I sat down with Dan, the first thing I said was, I said, well, I almost didn't get through the script. And he gave me this look of sort of shock. And I said, no, let me explain. I was reading the first 10 pages and I thought, I don't want to do a movie about a woman chained up in a basement. Like, this doesn't seem like... And then when it immediately flips and starts going in another direction, I thought, oh, wow, this is interesting. But yeah, that was when we met. And I think we just had sort of similar... my take aligned with my sort of thoughts about it, and the photography sort of aligned with what he was thinking and what he wanted to do with the movie, and we just we have similar tastes, and then also we bonded massively over video games. So we're both video game players, and so as soon as we discovered that, which we didn't actually discover until after we were in prep, because that didn't come up in our initial meetings, but then at one point we were talking about games. It was like, oh, you play that? Oh, I play that. And there are a lot of game references, a lot of things that we refer to. Obviously, we reference a lot of movies all the time when we're making films, but we definitely reference games. Oh, remember that cutscene from this and that, and remember the style of this. So yeah, we do reference for visual storytelling.
I don't know that we've ever talked to anybody about using video games as a visual reference, but when I think about it, Predator Badlands definitely has. Like, it would make a kick-ass game. There's game-like aspects to the way you guys cover scenes and even kind of the structure of it a little bit. Kind of like boss-level challenges and stuff like that throughout the whole movie. Do you think that really feeds into your aesthetic or your aesthetic when working with him?
I definitely think so. Even if it's only subconsciously, I think when I'm prepping for a film, I'm putting a bunch of images up on my wall from other films. And I don't necessarily pull images from games, but there are definitely sequences from video games. There's also a level of atmosphere and things, and the fact that when you're in a game, or even it's the same thing with essentially if you're making a movie that's completely either animated or CG or something, where you control the level, the quality of the sky, the quality of the light, the quality of the atmosphere, the texture, all that stuff you can control in a game. It's a lot harder to do in a movie, a lot harder to create that stuff, but that's sort of what we often go for. Dan is very much always about, well, how do we make this, what can we add to this, thinking about ways, whether it's smoke and fog, or whether it's rain, or whether it's, sand and dust blowing up, always what are the textural ways that we can affect the image, which then also affects the light. How do we give it mood? And because I think both of us played so many games, and you play these games where, they could just have this, this mist that can cover an entire sequence. And so we sort of strive to do that kind of thing as well, whenever we can.
You guys have collaborated now, I think 4 times, if I'm not mistaken. You did a episode of The Boys, and then Predator Badlands, and 10 Cloverfield Lane. You guys must have quite a shorthand. You guys probably are reading each other's mind a little bit right now. Can you talk about sort of like that process for pre to post? How it works. It starts by reading the script, I'm sure, and then getting into different aspects and testing. But can you take us through your process? How do you guys work together?
Yeah, so the scripts, the further along we go, the more we've gone, it feels like the scripts do evolve more as we shoot, because there's less of 10 Cloverfield Lane was a very strict, tightly structured thing. And not that Prey and Badlands weren't, but there's less dialogue as the movies sort of go, and then the sequences are quite heavy and previs, and Dan does a lot of previs even before I come on. He's prevised like the major set pieces. But what he and I tend to do is we go through the scenes, and there's sort of a multi-step process, but the first part is just talking about what's the overall sort of visual tone, what's the overall, camera work approach. And when we sat down for 10 Cloverfield Lane, I think the thing that Dan sort of said, well, how do you see this movie? Do you see it handheld? Do you see it really composed? Is it all, And I said, well, I don't think any movie has to ever be any one thing. I think certain sequences can be this, certain sequences can be that. And Dan was like, great, that's exactly how I see it. So we, bounce between handheld and then very composed and very precise, elaborate, shots. And so we'll talk about that. We also have an exercise which I wish I could take credit for, but the exercise that we do, and I don't remember where I stole this from, but we talk about each scene. If we could only do it in one shot, what would that shot be? So what is the oner for this scene? And sometimes we do oners. Dan likes oners for certain sequences, and we like to continue things. But the exercise just it really lets you figure out, well, who is the scene about, or what, who is the scene about? What is the context and what is the subtext? Sometimes you might have somebody talking the entire time, but they're not actually the person you want to be seeing. You want to be seeing the reaction of the other character or information that you want to reveal slowly throughout the shot. So that's an exercise we do. And then, we do the visual thing too, where, we talk about like, well, what is the kind of, how do we make this scene stand out? And so I think Dan is always looking for ways to make each set piece have a different, not necessarily a different just for the sake of different look, but like, what do we do here that's slightly different? What aspect of this are we looking for? And is this something that's quite moody? Is it something that's quite colorful? So that's sort of what we do. And then I pull all kinds of references and I'll put those in front of Dan and say, hey, I'm thinking about this. And he'll say, that's great. Or he'll say, no, I think it should be darker, or I think it should be this. And we just kind of slowly pick at those things until we, and that's all the way through shooting. And then through color correction, we're still sort of like, discussing it, and other people come on board, and other collaborators who also contribute massively to the look and those sorts of things.
Well, it sounds like you guys have a real rhythm. I've never heard of the idea of, if we only had one shot to tell this whole story, to explain the scene.
I'm gonna start doing that. That's a really good idea.
It's a really fantastic idea. Do you guys have a name for that? Do you have a shorthand that explains?
No.
Yeah. Okay.
I wish, but I should start thinking about that.
Yeah.
The oner challenge.
The oner challenge. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. There you go.
All right. So that's really good information for how you guys are building the visual look of the world and everything. And then once you get into production, after you've established and set what's most important and moving on, tell me a little bit about like how that post process goes. Are you coming in at the very, very end then to talk about color and to talk about the grade? Have you built most of it on set? This movie in particular, Badlands, has tons of VFX. Can you talk a little bit?
Well, Can I build on that question a little bit too? Which
build
is
away.
That there's a lot of CGI environments in this movie, interior and exterior, and when I'm in talking to cinematographers, I'm always curious how much your input was involved in the lighting of things that were made, ostensibly in post, that in CG elements. You're making the things that have to sit in it, but are you also talking to them about the things, how everything else looks that wasn't necessarily your job, but I feel like falls into your purview pretty hard?
Yes, I'll circle back to that because I'll circle back. I'll start with the difficulty, I think, of the sort of VFX. But we had Olivier Dumont was our VFX supervisor, and he was fantastic. And his process was constantly, I want this to be what you want, Jeff. And so it was always about how do you see this, and through the process, I think also obviously through Dan's, Dan wanting my involvement and Dan making sure that I was included. Most of the heavy lifting of color correction is definitely done towards the end. I mean, we just probably did our last session like 3 weeks ago, was how late, the process goes. But throughout, even for the last 6 months, every now and then I would jump on with Olivier and Dan, and we might look at sky references, and they would say, "Oh, what do you think about this? How does this feel?" And ultimately, Dan, it's his vision and his final say of whether he wants things to be quite dark or saturated in the general vibe. But they're definitely, Olivier is making sure that it kind of reflects the photography that was intended, which it's quite difficult. I think probably the biggest challenge on something like this is, in fact, when you are in these just completely blue screen environments. So in the Father Kills Quay sequence, it's essentially a bit of a patch of dirt and a small piece of spaceship that our Rob Vincent built. And then the rest of it is a 360 kind of blue environment. So it's a very difficult, and it's a day, it's like a dusky sort of day exterior. The problem is when you're doing if you're outside doing this for real, you have a reference of a sky, and shots, you might set up a shot and maybe the character's in semi-silhouette and against the sky, those values work really nicely and you're like, oh, this looks great, and you accept that. But when you're inside on a blue screen and you have no reference, now you're like, oh, are the characters too bright? Are the characters too dark? Because you have nothing that you can. I'm doing a movie right now in a ship, and we have a blue screen outside the big thing. But every time we light a scene, I just turn the blue screen off and it's black and it feels like the star field. And you're like, oh, that's what it should look like. Then you turn the blue screen back on and suddenly you lose your sense of place again. So it's a lot of that. So you just kind of do what you go, okay, well, I think this feels right, and then you hope. But then, Olivier comes in and they start building the skies and the environments, and they all looked incredible. But you do have a little work in the DI, because sometimes what happens is, like, I remember there was one time in particular where Dan and Olivier, it was a comp, and it was in that very sequence, and they were like, this shot doesn't feel, there was like something about how it didn't feel like in the world, like the characters didn't feel like they were inhabiting that space. And so I remember jumping on a call, and it was just about, we adjusted the values of the brightness of the characters versus the sky, and it was getting that ratio correct. And when you hit that sweet spot, and suddenly it's like, pop, oh, this now looks real, looks photo. I believe that they're in that world. So it can be quite tricky, but that's, but when everyone's all on board and everyone's sort of aiming for the same thing, then, you get there. Sometimes it takes more time than others, but, that's sort of the process of that.
You said that a lot of the sequences were kind of designed beforehand. But I'm just curious if you could walk us through the design of any sequence that jumps to your mind as like a signature sequence that you really put your stamp on, and how you and the director kind of walked through and kind of created the approach to the coverage, the way that you wanted it to look, the way you wanted it to flow.
Sure. I think I'm trying to think of which one. I think there's sort of probably the easiest one, because I think it was one of the earliest, might have even been the first previs that Dan did, is I don't know, we called it the elephant tree sequence, when Deck first lands on Genna, and then the kind of tree monster-y thing, not tree monster, because we called that was a different sequence, but the sort of branches of the trees are sort of attacking him. They take all his equipment, and then he has to run, he sort of escapes, he chops a bunch of them up. And I believe that was previs very, very early. So yeah, once that previs is created, we'll go through that, and then there might be suggestions that I have. There might be little tweaks, or there might be sometimes it's just also Dan will show people and sort of just like test the waters a little bit of like, oh, there might be things that are confusing, or maybe we're flipping the line at certain times. And so I might have a suggestion of like, well, hey, if we stay on this side of the line, I think people will continue to understand where we are. So we just, you finesse that a little bit. Then you get to the hard part of like, well, where are we going to shoot this? How are we going to shoot this? Because there are very, elaborate, complicated shots. And, I think Dan and I both, even though Dan is younger than I am, we have very similar tastes in films. And I think certain films that were super, very influential on us. I think almost anything that John McTiernan made, but particularly like Die Hard, Hunt for Red October, these very dramatic, I always think of them as very muscular camera work where, and there's layers to every shot where it's not just that you push in on a character, it's that you push in and then you also rack maybe to something that's happening in the background. And then you might even pan over to something, or you pull back with the character. It's the shots just, there's just layers and shots within shots and beats within those, even within a single frame, there's like action beats. And the way that we love anamorphic and we love the way that the lenses breathe. And I think it is a sort of going back to like sitting in a dark theater as a teenager and seeing Die Hard and these movies and the way that like the lenses breathe almost like became this very like you have a physical reaction to like the rack focus that almost becomes like a camera move in and of itself. So those elements all appear in all of the kinds of shots that Dan designs. Then you get to the part of now we have to find where it goes. And so we find a location that, you scouting New Zealand and you find that location, but then maybe we had to bring in extra trees, and now we've got to figure out, can we get, knowing the kinds of shots we want to do, we have to get a techno crane in there. And then the other thing is we're thinking about, that I think about, and luckily what's great about Dan is that he's always thinking about this too, is the light quality. So it isn't just, well, we're going to go and shoot this great sequence, but it's going to be outside in the middle of the sun and the middle of the day, and it's not going to look good. So always thinking about how do we stage this in any kind of cover, can we use tree canopies? Can we do this? That's why when we do those blue screen sequences, it's like, well, hey, this is an opportunity for it to be like an entirely dusk scene. So then on top of that, we now layer in, well, okay, let's now put atmosphere in, that textural thing. So I love the way it softens the lenses, it softens the light, and adds that kind of extraterrestrial, that otherworldly quality. And then you have to schedule this. That sequence was 4 days of shooting. Sun's, constantly moving. How do we organize these shots? So it's just that constant, you're just moving all the pieces around, getting the cranes in, and then you just have to chip away at it. I mean, it's something that we did like on 10 Cloverfield Lane. It was always like one shot at a time. That's the mantra. Is if you start thinking about the whole sequence and you think about like, oh my God, we've got to do all these things in 4 days, and we've got stunt guys rigging, and we've got to have this blue screen up here, and then we've got to go over here, and that can become quite overwhelming. So you just go, okay, this is the next thing we have to do, and we have to do this, and then we'll do that. And once we've done that, then we do the next thing. And you just keep chipping away, and making each shot work, and not moving on. Like Dan will not move on from something when it's not working. And so it might mean that we get less coverage of something else later, but that's okay. It's better to have 6 great shots than 12 average shots,
We've talked to plenty of people where it's like, if you're doing stuff that's heavy with VFX, anamorphic, VFX supervisors aren't going to be happy about anamorphic. How did you guys approach anamorphic for all the VFX that you guys had to do?
Well, it's funny. I mean, the entire, as I was saying about Olivier, he was fantastic, and the entire time he was never complained about the lenses. He was very, never did anything. Even the things like flares. Occasionally there might have been a flare that he was like, oh, if it was on a face, could we? But for the most part, even no matter what, he was like, no, I want it to be what you want. We'll work around that. He was really great. He was fantastic about that. I did hear a funny story, and I don't know who it was, but somebody else in post who had put a stick-up note on their desk that said, the Zelmus lenses was like, Zelmus, never use these again. And it wasn't about the flares. There's a lot of like soft I call it banding. I've heard people talk about the oval football of like where it's just like mush, out of focus. So which I really liked. But then what I heard, so I heard about the stick up note, but then apparently that same person came full circle and came back, or flipped 180 by the time it was over and was like, no, these lenses look amazing, and he loved them. So, but yeah, it was, it definitely can be a challenge. And you do have to, sort of, I did also have some Cooke anamorphic lenses, the Cooke 1.8 full frame lenses which I'd used on Prey, and they sort of felt actually too clean on Prey. So like Dan and I had used the Zelma, we had used them on a couple of commercials. So then we went with these on this one. But Kayvon Elhami, who runs Camtech in Los Angeles, where we got the lenses, he said, hey, what if I'll just send you some Cooke lenses as well, just in case. And we probably pulled them out maybe 4 times, where there were 4 shots where it was so like just either the flaring, which ordinarily was incredible, and that's why we used the lenses. There was a level of either flare or distortion that was just too much. So we did have those as well. But yeah, it was like 99% or 99.9% on the Zelma's lenses.
I'm curious about the integration of the physical on-set VFX type of apparatus, and I'm thinking specifically of like the masks of the Junta, like the Predator characters. I have to imagine that adds a certain layer of complexity, because I felt like quite often I was looking at stuff that wasn't entirely digital. I felt like there must be something physical and real. Was it just a bunch of tracking dots and all done in post? How did the masks come into play for principal photography?
For the most part, the Demetrius was wearing, and the other Predators for that matter, were wearing essentially the full armor and a full sort of suit, and then basically like a hood or what we call the cowl. So it was just an open face. But like this part, the sort of the tops of the heads, the ears, the dreads, the neck was all practical, and the part of the suit, the Predator suit. And then this part, the face for the performance, was just dots. The actor's face and the dots. We did have some stunt masks that were the full Predator masks for, any sort of wide shots where it felt like that they weren't going to necessarily have to do any kind of manipulation. And then that was just, 1 or 2 less VFX shots, or certainly a VFX element within the shot. But yeah, otherwise it's just Demetrius, performing and wearing that. It doesn't really change anything for me. It's like I'm still everything is the same, shooting the actor, whether he's wearing the mask or whether he's not. The rest of it is the environment that we want to see, the way we want to see it. So yeah, it didn't change much. We did a little bit of testing, and the only thing it does is that it makes you go, well, I don't know what. There's a certain kind of light that I'm lighting an actor's face with, which is a much sort of flatter, thing to work with, versus the Predator with the mandibles and then the texture of the skin. Yeah. So I would sort of try to clue in on the texture of the suit, just to tell me how sort of shiny it was and that kind of thing. But it's a little bit where you're like, okay, fingers crossed.
I want to talk a little bit about Dex and is it Thea back to back in this sort of like backpack carrying. My understanding is a lot of that was practical. It wasn't like a comp or something. That they actually strapped them together and did had them act and do out these scenes. Can you talk a little bit about that process? How that all worked?
Yes, they were. Elle was definitely strapped to Demetrius's back for, probably at least 90% of the things you see. There were a couple of comps in maybe some wide shots, but any of the close coverage, almost all the close coverage was them comped. It was not comped, it was practical. And some of it was quite elaborate, where stunts would have a crane and then they would be wired. Well, there were multiple versions of it. There was a version where Elle was basically like Demetrius is pulling like a little like two-wheel cart, and she's like sitting. So she's attached to him, but she's sitting and he's pulling her with wheels. There was a version where on hills, and also we shot in this amazing like. I don't know if it's like a sort of a small gorge with like a sort of heavy creek running through it, and it was like 2 or 3 feet of water in it. And so there was cables running, and she's on his back there, and so supported by cables. So there were multiple versions. There were actually some fun just actor puppeting where Elle was on the ground and Demetrius like picks her up and kind of pops her on his shoulder. And she just did that, like just acted it and kind of flopped around and got up on his back like that. And that was kind of a fun thing where it was just completely in camera. But yeah, that was, again, not so complex for me, but definitely more complex for VFX because of just the wire work, and you're trying not to get the wires in front of anyone's faces and that sort of stuff. And so that becomes quite tricky. And in terms of composing, you're trying to find the sort of that spot where the camera can go between wires and things like that when they were suspended. For the other stuff, it was relatively simple. When she's on the wheelie thing, that was sort of the easiest version.
It's really effective. It's the way that they move and the amount of weight that doesn't appear to be there. It's almost like she's, and of course, giving nothing away because this happens in the first, a few minutes of the movie. It's like a torso. It's only like half of an android, half of a synth. So it's like doesn't appear to be particularly heavy, and it's super convincing.
Like one of my questions, and it was going more with the mask of the main character. Like when you were in post, if it's all CGI, if they're making a CGI face, which by the way was crazy convincing. When I was watching it, I used to be a makeup effects artist. When I was watching it, I was like going like, that one looks real. I think that one might be CGI, like between the various characters. And because our main guy was so convincing looking, but did you come in like when they were building the VFX of that and say like, no, let's bring the light back a little bit. Let's give it more of a kick. Let's go a little bit more low-key, negative fill. I don't know how you do that in the VFX process, but were you given any kind of input at that stage?
No, not really. I think, basically once they have their, once VFX has their references, they take their silver and gray balls, and they collect the light and the color charts, and they have all the references, and then they just basically build based on that. And we did shoot, so we have also like the head that we would bring in, and they would also always do a reference of a practical head that was not a mask. It was just a head that didn't move or anything, but they would stick that in front of the camera or stick it where the actors were, so they'd have a sort of photo reference of the real thing. So the only sort of my only participation really is just again at the very end in the DI, where it might be like there was there were several times where I wanted to sort of bring highlights down on the mask, on the faces and things, or edges that felt a bit hot sometimes, or shiny things that sort of seemed a little distracting. So that was really the only time that I kind of had any sort of control or ability to just sort of tweak the faces.
Well, let's talk a little bit about like overall color palette, because we have a couple of different planets. Was it Yautja, the predator Yautja planet that we start on? It looked a lot like Vasquez Rocks to me, so I assumed that it was at least inspired by Vasquez Rocks. But you've got the planet that we spend most of the movie on, and then there's a lot of interiors, especially in the climax, and there's kind of a color story that I feel like, and then obviously we go back to Yautja Prime at the very end, but there's like some kind of color story that's being told. What was the color palette that you were working with? What do the colors of the various things represent to you guys?
Yeah, Yautja always wanted to feel, so the idea for Yautja was that it wanted to be, bleak's not the right, I guess harsh. It wanted to feel a bit harsh, but obviously, but still beautiful. You don't want it to be like, hard lighting and that sort of thing. But that went in that wanted to be like a brown, sort of a browner palette. And then there's a little bit of blue. It's very much a brown and blue palette. A little bit of warm tones in there as well. But that was kind of the palette for that, mostly inspired by some references that we had early on that were of like, it is based on, it's like a sandy sort of desert adjacent planet with these very stark rock formations. And yes, Vasquez rocks and lots of other references from all over the globe that were kind of the inspiration. And then from there was those color palettes of that kind of, with the brown tones. And then so that it wasn't so just like brown and monochromatic, then there's the introduction of the blue in the sky and that sort of stuff to kind of balance that out. So that was definitely the kind of Yautja Prime vibe. Then when we get to Genna, we went more, everything's still always wants to feel, for me, it always wanted to feel rooted in reality, even though we're on another planet. So reality is kind of whatever you want. There was actually an interesting discussion early on before we started shooting where Ben Rosenblatt, the producer, was talking about, hey, because we were talking about what do we do with Genna at night, because we could do whatever we want. And there was a conversation like, well, night could be red. We're on another planet. You could do whatever. And I just thought, I think that's a lot. Visually, it would be quite overwhelming. But also, I think, even though we're on another planet, there's a sort of expectation from an audience that if you go red, it becomes very stylized. And we sort of know what movie night kind of is. And I felt like that is the most natural version that keeps it feeling more grounded, like a real place, the further we go. I think the less people feel like it's a real place, even though, it's a real place that's not an actual real place, but that it could be a real place.
Well, I always think about Genna, like those images we see from the surface of Mars or Venus or something like that. And it's like, that looks like some place I could have gone. Like you could find places on Earth that look like that.
Sure. Yeah. So I think Genna ended up being a bit more of a green palette just for the nature of what it was, and very naturalistic lighting, but there was greens. And then at night we, played that sort of bluer color at night. And those are, and then there's the, trying to find, well, what is the what are the colors of the Weyland-Yutani base? So what is the kind of color palette of that? And that always to me felt like it wanted to be industrial. So it became more of, rather than that being just kind of a moonlight wash over the whole thing, wanted the contrast of when Deck's out and his ship at night and the places when they're more remote, so that wanted to feel, it's the one chance really to kind of introduce those kind of like slightly industrial colors, or those, of like the cyans, the sort of warm whites of practical lights, and the cyans and greens and things like that you get from industrial fixtures and fluorescent fixtures and that kind of feeling. So that was the sort of color palette that the base became. And contrast, and that also did have blue as well, because the sort of the fence ended up being, which is all VFX, of like this blue thing that you get hits of, but mostly, contrasted with a sort of warm greeny industrial kind of those practical lights that we built and put up over the base.
I was wondering if you guys looked at all at aliens, because there's definitely an alien. Well, there's some aliens, direct aliens references, specifically like the Mechabot that people can wear. And I was wondering if there was any visual reference to that, other than obviously using some of the same ideas and props and stuff. But did you look at it and go like, oh, okay, here's a signifier? Like when we first saw that Mechabot, it gave me like the chills, like I was watching Aliens, in the theater. How intentional was that, or is that just my aspiration to see stuff like that?
Oh no, 100% intentional. It's definitely Aliens, one of my all-time favorite movies. And we wanted that exact same feeling. The color palette of the design of it is the same, but we even went specifically we wanted that sort of old school yellow, rotating light on top. It really wanted to feel like that. It was just like the version of the power loader from Aliens, but like on steroids, just the massive version of it. So that was very intentional. I think even the sort of blue fence, that sort of like laser fence that surrounds the whole thing, is kind of inspired by the blue laser that in the very beginning of Aliens, when they come. When they're salvaging when they first find Ripley, and that machine comes in, the blue laser like scans across the space. I mean, I have such vivid memories of yeah. So I think that was inspired. Was also inspired by Aliens. I don't think there was probably too much else, but I think certainly like maybe there might not be too much else consciously. There's definitely a lot of subliminal, influence from a lot of James Cameron movies for me and for Dan as well. Also the Alien movies. Prometheus was quite a big influence, I think, on this one for me, because I remember, and part of why I wanted to shoot in New Zealand, not that it was my choice per se, but I remember the sort of sequences in Prometheus where they are, once they've landed and they're kind of discovering the planet, and there's just those incredible shots with like, they're sort of forests, but they're like on slopes and these rocks that felt really extraterrestrial, like nothing I had seen before, but yet it didn't feel, sometimes you get a sci-fi movie and it all feels quite CG, or it all feels sort of like almost overly stylized in a way that you're like, well, that's cool and interesting, but I don't believe that actually exists somewhere out in the galaxy, Whereas with Prometheus, I felt like, oh yeah, this feels like another planet, but I feel like I believe that it could exist somewhere, and I also believe that it looks scary and dangerous, and so that was a big sort of inspiration for, I think, and for the photography too, because in the way that the sort of mood of it, and that constantly searching for how do we get overcast, not that you can get overcast, but how do we sort of keep trying to find ways to imbue the film with that sort of that mood and that kind of ominousness.
As a giant fan of the Predator movies, and honestly the franchise, I've loved the franchise, but something that Prey did that I think made it resonate with audience in a way that the previous sequels hadn't as much, is that it found what made this so exciting the first time you ever saw it. It kind of almost reset the franchise in a weird way. And in so doing, you kind of created your own look for it. It didn't look like the other Predator movies. Not that they all look the same. They all kind of have their own look. But I was curious, like how you built that look, and then how did you reference that look for Badlands? Like, how did you build upon what you did in Prey for Badlands? How are they one of a piece?
That's really, that's interesting. So with Prey, I actually, whenever I do any movie, my first thought is, how do I subvert this in a way that like subvert the audience's expectation of what they think a movie of this genre should be? So what can I do? What can I bring to this? What can I do differently that doesn't harm the movie? I don't want to do something that's like diametrically opposed to what the movie is, but can I do something slightly different? And so with Prey, the expectation of a Predator movie, and you're right, they don't all look the same, but there is a certain I wouldn't even say look, but there is a certain continuity to it, to the way that the films look. So the first thought, my first thought was like, well, how do I do this differently? But it was in a lot of ways, it was easy. And a lot of people said, oh, you made sort of a bold choice of like going super naturalistic and making it look more, being inspired by The Revenant and movies like that. And I thought, what felt like a kind of obvious choice to me, because the setting really, the setting allowed that. It was like, okay, here we are in the 1700s, on a land that's, untouched, and we don't have any other light sources, and how can we make this the most elegant version? So yeah, the inspiration was to do something that sort of, let's make it like as if we were shooting. It could be a historical drama. It could be an epic sort of, kind of movie that's not the thing. So that was the inspiration. And then it became about not using lights as much as possible, certainly for day stuff. And then when we go into the night stuff, how can we use torches as single sources as much as possible? How can we make the moonlight, as sort of elegant and unlit as possible? That's I think one of the bigger challenges of any movie is when you only have moonlight as a source. How do you still see what's going on, but not, how does it not look like it's overly lit? And, anyway, so that was sort of Prey. And because we only really had, other than daylight, we only had fire and moonlight. So it was a very streamlined palette, which I think leads to then a very sort of a more elegant. You have quite an elegant palette because you're only working with a couple of colors and they're complementary colors. So everything becomes quite, you can get these quite stark and bold images, especially when we were doing the fire scenes. So then going into Badlands, it was definitely, I wanted to kind of continue that naturalistic sort of feeling and that very grounded approach. But we had to expand on that because we're into other territory now. So we have some things, a lot of the day stuff on Genna, the day stuff sort of on Yautja, even though it was on stage. It's like, okay, it needs to be very simply lit, very... you don't want to sense light sources, you don't want to feel like there's a lot of stuff competing with each other, but we have to go to a totally different space now for the Yautja, for the Genna base. Not so much the night planet, because that felt very sort of moonlight, single sourcey, but then we get into like tons of light sources, different color temperatures when we're dealing in, not a little bit inside the sets, but mostly the base exterior, which, composes most of that finale, where it has to be a whole other thing. And I always wanted it to, again, the sort of, the starting principle is like, this needs to feel like a real thing. So if we're on a military industrial base that's, a little bit temporary, like it's not a thing that like, it's not a city somewhere, it's like a thing that they've propped up, and it needs to reflect that. And what are the light sources? So we were like, okay, they would be putting lights up, the inspiration of like the towers. You get the generator towers and they have the four heads. And it was like, that's what should be basically the dominant light source for this entire thing, for the entire base. So we designed these fixtures that we could then, put up and move around but still with that grounding principle of like the lighting has to feel real and always based on a source and not something sort of that just comes from nowhere just because you need to see the scene.
Cool. Well, I'm good, Ilya. If you are, I always like to kind of open it up to you to say, like, were there any big challenges that you had to overcome? Something that no one's maybe asked you about, but something that you're especially proud of, or was an interesting construction, race against time or physics or whatever. So something where you guys pulled off something that you might not have been expecting would be easy to pull off.
That's a good question. I mean, I would say that about most of the movie. I would say that a lot of the movie, I think, when you're in it, I guess, I think it's interesting to, now that like seeing the movie in its completion, where, when we're working, even though we're, there are things like you level up in certain areas where, for example, on 10 Cloverfield Lane, I don't know that we had a techno crane ever. On Prey, we had a techno crane for probably 20, 25 days, but that was the extent of our budget. Now on Badlands, it was like, we can actually afford to carry a techno crane the entire way. So you kind of level up with a sort of certain gear, and there's maybe a few more days to shoot certain sequences. But when you're in it and you're in those trees and you're still shooting like a close-up of an actor being dragged across the dirt, it still feels like in the same, you still feel like you're doing similar things that you've always been doing, because ultimately it's those intimate moments that are the ones that actually matter the most. And you want to care about the characters. There's none of the spectacle matters if you don't care about the characters. It's so when you're in it, you don't really have a sense of like where it's maybe going to end up and the scope of it. And that sometimes is good, but I think sometimes it can be, particularly with, and I think it really sort of relates again to like the blue screen stuff, where that to me was the biggest challenge of just not really being sure what something is going to be, not really knowing quite how something's going to turn out. And you just sort of have to hope that what you're doing then works with what everyone else is doing. And that probably is the biggest challenge. There are the challenges of going into these locations that are really difficult to access. And, you know, we had cameras on floating devices down some of these like streams and cranes in places that they're dragging up the sides of hills. And those challenges are difficult, but they're not the ones, they're the ones that you can see and you see how they get overcome. It's the kind of creative ones where you don't really know what the end result will be. And I guess that challenge, I think that's what I'm probably most pleased with, is that, oh wow, some of these sequences that I didn't know where they were going to go and what they were going to end up like. And then just being pleased with, not only that, pleased with the way that they integrate with the rest of the film and that they do feel part of the whole and they don't stand out as some sort of VFX sort of sequence that sometimes can pull audiences out. You know, you have some sequences where we're just back in the jungle with Deck and Thea, and it's, you know, other than the faces, it's all practical and it feels very immersive and earthy, and, you know, even though it's not earthy, that sense of like you could actually touch the vines and the things. You know, what Prey was, 99% of Prey is that. So this had not the opposite, but it had a lot of the other. So I think that's the most satisfying thing is seeing those things integrated into the rest of the film and feeling as part of the whole.
Well, I think that this is I really just actually have one more thing. In fact, I'll bring it up because it really just sort of went out into the interwebs right before we started this interview, actually, since we're talking to you on Saturday. And the movie went wide in the U.S. Yesterday on Friday, November 7th. There's now a chart which lists all of the debuts for all 7 of the Predator franchise movies. And in case you were wondering which one had the best opening weekend ever, it's Predator Badlands. And
really? I didn't know that.
It's exceeded expectations by people were targeting it to do about 25 million. It's now estimated to be doing 37 million. And it also has the best cinema score audience reaction of any film previously at an A-. So now they're thinking that this movie is actually going to go, it's going to go. So it's there's really, really good word of mouth out there right now.
So it's going to be, it'll be the number 1 movie this week, you think?
It is the number 1 movie right now. Basically, they know by like they know like late on Friday who's going to win. They can tell it's all predictable now. They have all the algorithms to say like, oh, this many screens, this much dollars have come in. We can extrapolate Saturday and Sunday. But as of like 2 hours ago, cinema, you know, different box office websites are plugging in the projected totals of 37 million. So congratulations on having the number 1 movie at the box office and what looks like the best debut of any movie in the Predator franchise.
Wow. That's a big deal.
Super cool.
That is
very
super,
exciting.
super
in your face, Arnold Schwarzenegger and John McTiernan.
I'm not
Rob
adjusting for
Bottin.
inflation,
Yes,
so there might be some differences, but regardless, it's an incredible debut. It's really great.
Yeah, it's great. We do have to all remember. I think the thing that is important to remember, though, is that none of this would exist without John McTiernan and Arnold. It's interesting to think about
Carl Weathers,
that sort of legacy.
Jesse the Body Ventura.
Yeah.
Exactly. All the people. Danny Glover.
All of them, yeah.
Yes. This has been so much fun, Jeff. I'm really glad that you got to come on the show and we got to chat about this. Do you do any social media if people want to, do you have an Instagram if people want to reach out? Is there a way that people can find you?
I do have Instagram, at Jeff Cutter. So that's where I am. I'm not always on it. It's not my favorite thing, but yes, I do have it.
All right. Well, fantastic. We will put a link to it over in the show notes for this episode at camnoir.com.
Okay.
Jeff, thank you so much for being on the Cinematography podcast.
Thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate it. It was great talking to you both.
Thank you.
So that was Jeff Cutter. Jeff, thanks so much for being on the show. Great work on Predator. Really looking forward to your next big movie.
I'm looking forward to the next Predator, too. Jesus Christ.
Indeed.
And now, short ends.
All right. So, Ben, it is our short end time of the show. It's when we talk about pet obsessions. It's when we talk about what we're into. Could be anything. What are you all about this week?
Well, I had an interesting night last night that I kind of wanted to share with you, and that's that I know it sounds like I'm shilling for Regal. I promise that Regal has given me nothing. It's just there's a Regal theater that is literally 5 minutes from my house, and I got a Regal pass a few years ago, kind of as an excuse to find myself going to more movies. And Regal has been doing this thing, and I think AMC does something similar, where they call it Mystery Movie Monday, and on Mondays they just kind of have whatever. And so last night I went to it, and it was Sisu Road to Revenge, which is like, I would describe, if you've seen the first Sisu, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's like somebody said, what if we made John Wick, except the protagonist is like 20 years older and there's a body count like 5-10 times more, and it takes place around World War II. And Sisu Road to Revenge was great. But this is just the amuse-bouche for my short end, and that's that I had been thinking about going to see Keeper, the new Oz Perkins movie. Oz Perkins made Long Legs last year. We had Andrei Sorokin on the DP. He didn't shoot this one. A guy named Jeremy Cox shot it. He also shot The Monkey for Oz Perkins. So Oz Perkins, within the span of about a year, has had 3 movies in theaters. He had Long Legs, then The Monkey, now Keeper. And I think Keeper is freaking amazing. And I know it has very much split horror fans because it is what we call a slow burn. And a lot of times when I hear filmmakers say they want to make a slow burn movie, my gut feeling is, oh, you could only think of 3 things to have happen in your movie rather than 5. Like you're creatively bankrupt, and so you're just going to make me stare at wallpaper for a long time. And the trick to a slow burn, whether you're making Ty West's House of the Devil or Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, is like the payoff has to be something pretty special. And I don't want to spoil anything here, but the payoff in Keeper is pretty special.
That's great.
Pretty special.
So don't spoil it, but you were satisfied.
I won't spoil. But I want to just give a shout out to Jeremy Cox's amazing cinematography. Like, every shot in this movie is gorgeous. And it's a lot of, there's a lot of long lens, shallow depth of field kind of stuff, which it's one of those, it's kind of a cabin in the woods story. It's not a Evil Dead cabin where it's like falling apart. It's like a rich person's expensive cabin in the woods. But, these things can get repetitive because you're in the, they aren't large locations. You're in the same rooms over and over again. This, like, every shot is filled with tension. And I honestly didn't know what was going on in it. And in our close focus, when I was saying that the way movies are marketed is just not doing it lately, I've been seeing trailers of this movie for a long time, and I had no idea. I didn't even know what the hell I was getting myself into. I didn't know what it was about. And the thing is, you want to walk a fine line and not spoil it because it's got surprises and twists in it. But I feel like the trailers, I went back and watched them, just don't do this movie justice. And it's from Neon, and I feel like Neon's been pretty good about this kind of stuff lately. But they kind of, this movie isn't finding an audience, and I think it's because they haven't been marketing it very well. It's a really unique film. So, that's my short end. If you can get to a theater, I would say catch Keeper. And secondly, if you are near a Regal, consider going to Mystery Movie Mondays. It's a cheaper ticket price, and it's a movie that hasn't come out yet. So Sisu Road to Revenge, I don't know what the exact release date is, but it's probably not for another month or so. Might not be till next year.
All right. Cool.
Right.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah. So definitely check it out. So Ilya, what is your pet obsession this week?
I recently got rid of one of my streaming services, and
which one? Or do you want to
I don't mind saying I got rid of Disney. Disney. I got rid of it a couple of months ago now.
Somebody doesn't have a 7-year-old. Anyway,
no, my kids are teenagers now, so they actually said to me, "Hey, can we get rid of Disney and then get Paramount so we can watch South Park?" And I was like, Yeah, okay. We ended up getting Paramount so that my teenagers could watch some South Park, and it's been great. And we've been also enjoying The Daily Show and some other stuff. But one thing I didn't expect to find myself really liking again, because it's been years since I watched it, is The Amazing Race. The Amazing Race has been on television since 2001. They're on its 38th season right now. I had missed the last 3 seasons, so I'm now playing catch up.
Yeah, that show's old enough to run for Congress.
It basically is. But I would say that to anyone out there who's decided, you know what, I don't like reality shows. Reality shows are not for me. I think it's actually worth trying The Amazing Race again. There is something, I would say, they have got it honed to such a fine point now. They know exactly how to make the thing move, not to have it feel like there's a lot of fluff. And it really is about sort of like the love of travel and the love of camaraderie. And there's some, really, really joyful watching people melt down trying to do unusual or unexpected tasks. They didn't plan on it. It's very different. Back when it was in rentals, I used to supply camera equipment to all of these reality shows, including things like Fear Factor. And I would say it's a very different visceral feeling when you would watch those types of reality shows. Amazing Race doesn't have that type of visceral feeling. It has a joyful feeling. And I actually found myself with my wife several times going all right, in this roadblock, what would you do? Would you do this? Would you be the one to do this? Would it be me? And I got to say, the Amazing Race is light entertainment, but they've done a really good job with it. And I'd say that the episodes that they're producing now are the best episodes they've ever done. So even if you're not a reality television person, I'd say it's worth going back and trying The Amazing Race. They've won more, Emmy Awards than any other reality program in the history of television. And I can see why. It's really a good show.
I've never seen a single episode of it. I've never seen that. I've never seen Big Brother. I've seen a little Survivor, but not much.
I don't think you need to go back and start at the beginning. You could pretty much jump in at almost any point and try The Amazing Race from the beginning of the episode, though, because I got to say they do have a little bit more of a shorthand now. They don't necessarily explain who everyone is right away. They kind of let that dribble out because, of course, some people are going to be eliminated pretty quickly. But yeah, it's a well-done show, and congratulations to Bertram Van Munster and everyone else on that team. They've done a really solid bit of work, and what I'm seeing now is as good as any episodes they've ever made. So it's great.
Okay, I'll go with that. But when you start endorsing Jersey Shore, that's what I'm.
Yeah, you know what? I'm not endorsing Jersey Shore. Sorry, not doing that. Not endorsing Big Brother. Not endorsing any of the other shows. Yeah. All right,
Big Brother could be the best show ever. I've never seen it. I honestly,
I was not the best show ever.
It's a bunch of people in a house.
Yeah, it's not for me. Yeah,
I can see that without leaving my house.
That's exactly true.
There's a bunch of people here too.
Let me open the store. Oh, look at there. There's people in a house.
It's Big Brother. Anyway.
All right, Ben. That does it for this episode. Where can people find you? They want to reach out to you.
You can find me at benrock.com. That's you go there and find. I need merch. I should do merch. Anyway, I'm really working on building up my toxic fan base there. So come join my toxic fan base at benrock.com. Where can people find you? You
can find me at Hot Rod Cameras, hotrodcameras.com, or this week it seems to be Instagram. So at Ilya Friedman on Instagram. Ben, who made this show possible?
Almost single-handedly, Alana Cody, who's producing it, setting up all these interviews. We have some great ones coming up. There's one I'm very excited that I haven't done yet, but saw the film. Very excited to talk to this DP. And so she's producing and also editing, still cutting away, and even wrote a new piece of copy that everyone get ready. You're going to hear a new outro that we'll be doing here in just a second. We got to thank her, and we got to thank Kays Alatrakshi, who composes all the music on this show and lots of other things. He's a great composer. Check out his website, musicbykays.com, or go watch him fix synthesizers on YouTube at Kays Labs.
Indeed. All right. So, Ben, we've got a new outro. Do you want to take us out?
This has been Cinepod, the cinematography podcast presented by Hot Rod Cameras. Find your next camera, lens, or accessory at hotrodcameras.com. Watch and subscribe to our show on YouTube or listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Follow and interact with us on Instagram, Threads, Facebook, Blue Sky, and LinkedIn. But not X. Don't do that. Thanks for tuning in. Okay, those people watching this on YouTube will watch my eyes avert to the Google Doc. This has been Cinepod, the Cinematography podcast, prevented. I got to do that again. Totally prevented by hot rod cameras. I'm going to do this again.
Yeah, and
This has been
slow down a smidge.
Here, let me. This has been Cinepod, the Cinematography podcast, prevented. I did it again. What the fucking fuck? All right, one last time. Ilana, feel free to leave this in.